Welcome to a brand new series on the channel, DC Thursday. We're going to be mostly focusing on drawing DC characters, from superheroes to villains, and everything in between. This week we're going to be focusing on drawing Absolute Batman, just as the thumbnail shows. I haven't actually drawn this variation of Batman before, so it'll be a great learning experience for myself, and anyone else who's interested in learning how to draw him. The goal for DC Thursday is just the same as Marvel Monday. We're going to try to release one video or one illustration every week of a DC character. Like I said, will be villains, superheroes, and everything in between. Leave a comment below for who you think we should draw next. I'll give you a sneak peek as to who's coming up next week. So just like Spider-Man, I feel like if you grew up reading comic books, you have your own specific favorite Batman artist. I have about four, potentially five. One is Jim Lee, just because that's what I grew up reading. I always felt like he really nailed the look for Batman. He added his own little spin onto it from the previous artist, and he gave him a grittier look that still holds today. That's why you get a lot of the movies. He has a more darker, grittier character. For me, he's one of the artists that helped popularize that. His art pops out and stands out really well when it comes to drawing Batman. The next Batman artist on my list is Neal Adams. I always feel like he added his own flair to the character. The anatomy was always good. He drew a nice flowing cape that I always admired. I honestly think when they go to do the next Batman live action movie, they should steal some of the designs and ideas that he came up with for Batman to add to the costume. I always thought that he drew that blue, silver costume or gray costume with the hints of yellow really, really well. I've always been surprised that nobody's just stolen that design for the live action movies. I think it'd be a perfect fit for a slightly lighter. The next Batman artist for me is Freddie Williams II. He's a slightly newer for Batman, not technically, but like I think he started working on them in like the mid 2000s. But his Batman always looks super intimidating. It looks like he could throw you through a brick wall, which is kind of what you want for Batman, where generic thug thinks twice, then maybe three times before he decides to throw hands with him. I always felt that he nailed that look in aesthetics. I also think it helps with how he adds his rendering with that. I think it's like a pencil wash or colored wash to it. It always made his stand out really, really well. I also think I enjoyed it because of just how he draws his anatomy and characters in general. If you've ever seen him draw He-Man or the Ninja Turtles, they always look super imposing, which is kind of what you want for those types of characters. Last and definitely not least, one of my all-time favorite Batman artists, which probably my introduction to the character, is Bruce Timm's The Animated Series. I don't think that any other version of the series or any other version of Batman has even come close to the storytelling that he came up with for the animated series. It later went into Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. The art style was always excellent. I always thought it stood out. You could tell he was inspired by classic artists like Jack Kirby and guys in around that golden age era of comics. But he just nails everything for the aesthetics to the storytelling of Batman, and the amount of respect that he had for the source material shines through in almost every story that's in that animated series. Everything from his introduction of Harley Quinn, it made sense. The way he came up with some of the stories or put his own spin on uh, what's his name, Mr. Freeze, to having the crazy characters like the Joker. His designs really worked for the characters. The stories were just perfect. The Clayface story, I think they're turning that into like a live action TV series or movie. That's mostly based off of some of the stuff that he's done. He's done other really good stories, like in the Justice League stories for Superman. I just think that the work that he did on that series still far surpasses everything else that I have ever seen in an animated series for Batman and even a live action one. None of them are quite as good, in my opinion. I know some people will mention The Brave and the Bold, and that's an okay series, and I think it's called The Batman. I enjoyed that series too. I primarily remember the episode where the Joker decides that he wants to be the superhero instead of Batman. So he drugs Batman to think he's the Joker, and he dresses up like Batman to stop crime. Like, those were great. I always thought that they handled Bane really well in that series as well. But the storytelling in the animated series was top shelf. I just can't think of anything that's been written or produced for Batman that's been even remotely close to better than it. But hey, that's just my opinion. What's your favorite incarnation of Batman? Whether it's a movie, animated series, leave it in the comments below, and maybe it's something I'll look into and check out later. So let's jump into where we're at in the drawing currently. And now I'm just adding in some of the costume details after figuring out the anatomy. Also figuring out where the light source is and adding in the shading. Figuring out if I need to add more or less in certain areas. Batman has a specific look that I'm trying to capture, which is he's got a lot of blacks and shadows, but a lot of the color pops out through depending on the artist that's working on him. Sometimes you'll see the gray really stand out, other times it's more of a darker suit. So I'm just trying to find a happy medium for the absolute Batman. I still haven't read the comics for that just because I've learned the hard way that unless I'm going to get a physical copy or a downloadable PDF, I don't buy anything. Like when I had Comixology, that's where I used to buy all the books from, like some of my digital copies of the books. I know that most people prefer to have an actual physical copy, but where I live, sometimes paying for the shipping is way overpriced. It's one of the reasons that when I get a book, it's usually digital. But at the time, Comixology used to come in clutch before they got sold over to Amazon. Before that, on Comixology, I think I had somewhere around 300-400 books. So I was reading John Byrne's run on She-Hulk. I was rereading some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle books. I'd bought and read the Luther Strauss series. I was reading Invincible because they were releasing those. I think it was every month. So I was buying. There was this thing I had somewhere around like just a little bit over half the series was done at that time. I was reading Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I was reading some Spider-Man books. I was reading some Lady Death stuff. I was reading Miss Marvel stuff. Just a whole host of different books. I was reading New 52 Supergirl. So I had a whole collection of books. And then when they sold out to Amazon, or Amazon bought them out, somehow I ended up with two Comixology accounts, and they transferred over the wrong one. So I went from having like 300-400 books to having five. So I reached out to them for help. They couldn't figure out what the problem was because in their system it said it did transfer it over. I gave them the other account and they couldn't find it in the system. So I lost hundreds of books. So from there on out, I refuse to buy or pay for any book that I'm not going to get a digital copy of that's downloadable that I own. I have zero interest in that. I learned that the hard way, so I don't do that again. That's why I mostly go through Kickstarter for comic books, because they send you a downloadable PDF that you end up owning. I do feel like for the face for this character, it looks more like Arkham Knight Batman than it does Absolute Batman in the face. It doesn't look bad, but I don't think I quite captured how the Absolute version looks. But I do think I nailed the overall aesthetic that is Batman in terms of the penciling and rendering and where the light source and shadow should be. So just finishing up adding the finishing touches to the suit itself before we jump into the inking. I do think that I learned a few things from some of the Marvel Monday rendering, where I'm cleaning up the inking a little bit differently. I started to use the lasso to keep it a little bit cleaner in certain areas, and that does seem to work. I think going forward, when I go in to do some of these, we'll use the lasso, but we'll also use a bit more of the feathering brush that I've been trying to fine tune a little bit. It does seem to work in certain areas. It does seem to work in a lot of the areas. You can see me using it in certain areas like around the neck where I'm adding feathering to it. I do think it needs a bit more fine tuning before it's perfect, but I don't think it'll ever be 100% perfect, but it does come in handy. It adds in a lot of texture, and it's also helping to speed up the process a little bit. Because when I do it by hand, sometimes I don't always feel like I'm getting enough ink on the brush itself, and that just seems to fix a lot of the problems that I was having. I've also been playing around with these fine liner brushes that I found. I believe that they were from another YouTuber. I can't remember his name. I think it's Scott Drummond, I want to say, where his is set up where each one is its own like fine liner tip, so it's like 0.3, 0.05. So I've been messing around with some of those just to see if it speeds up the process with some of the line work. So I don't have to guess at what size I'm drawing at. I'm just jumping into the different sizes that I actually need. It does seem to work. It does speed up the process a little bit. They're also really great for adding in the blacks because they're kind of like Sharpies. They seem to do a really good job with that. The feathering brush, again, you can see where it's like around the rib cage where I'm starting to get a good feel for it, but it does look a little bit better. I don't know if I quite nailed the cape rendering. I still have to work on that a little bit, but other than that, it did turn out pretty well. So now we're into the home stretch of the illustration, which is the coloring portion. I did skip the flatting because I don't think anyone really needs to see that. If you want to, I can include them, but it's kind of a boring thing to watch, so I just figured I would remove it. Again, if you want to see me flat, you can leave that in the comments below, but I don't think anyone really cares that much about it. Adding in the coloring rendering portion went by a lot quicker than it normally does, just because the blacks carry a lot of the shadows. Just kind of going in and reinforcing where the shadows should be helps tremendously in terms of when you get into the suit. It works really well with the pouches on the side as well. I do think I could have picked a slightly more desaturated flat color for the suit itself. The Absolute Universe, while it has color, it's really, sometimes it just looks like it's gray. Some of the images I found has it more of a blue. So I kind of try to use a mixture of both and my own judgment for it. But the shading for it does add a lot when you do that first pass of shadows. It helps to really define where the abs should be before I go in to add in any of the highlights, which you'll probably see me getting ready to start doing pretty soon here. Highlights are still something I'm trying to fine-tune my approach for. I mostly think I rely a little, sometimes too heavy on the airbrush, or it gets a little bit messy. So I usually add in a little bit of the airbrushing and then I try to reinforce it with a few extra lines or a few hard lines. I do want to see if I can get to a point where I'm mostly just using harder lines, but maybe softening the edges a little bit just to make it feel more complete without going too heavy on just the airbrush, because sometimes it turns out a little muddy. Well, that's all for this week's video. I'll see you next week, and just as promised, there's a sneak peek as to who the next challenger will be. Put your guesses in the comments below. See you next week.